and good evening. This is the I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm David Matlin, and these are today's headlines. 6 years ago today, an explosion in Damascus killed Imad Muniyah, one of the most infamous terrorists of the last 2 decades. We speak with one man who knew him as a journalist and as a hostage. A diplomatic debacle in the Israeli parliament. The European Parliament's president comments on Palestinian living conditions and prompts a mass walkout by the right wing. And Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan says the normalization of ties with Israel will only happen when the blockade of the Gaza Strip ends. The Israeli government refuses. Well, now it's been 6 years since Imad Muniyah, a Hezbollah commander and one of the West's most wanted terrorists, was assassinated in his car in Damascus, while Hezbollah still threatens to avenge his death. I-24 News reporter Eli Ochenberg looks back.
On the evening of February the 12th, 2008, Hezbollah commander Imad Muniyah was in the process of planning the organization's next terror attacks in the Middle East and abroad. He had no idea that soon, very soon, he would be killed in what became one of the most significant and famous assassinations. It was at night that Muniyah left his apartment building in the Kfar Susa neighborhood of Damascus. Some claim it was after meeting his mistress. Others argued he had just finished a meeting with some of the most senior Palestinian leaders. Muniyah came down alone and began walking towards his car, but the driver's seat headrest has been replaced by one containing an explosive, which detonated with Muniyah inside the vehicle. The blast completely destroyed the car and left minimum damage on nearby buildings, killing Muniyah alone on the spot. In Hezbollah's eyes, the Israeli Mossad was responsible. The assassination of the arch-terrorist was very welcome news in Washington, Buenos Aires, Tel Aviv, and although quietly, even in Beirut and Baghdad. For Hezbollah and Damascus, however, the loss of Muniyah, who was a brilliant military tactic and a key contact to Tehran and a successful political leader, was a severe blow to ongoing activities and operations. These are only few of the attacks led by Muniyah since he became Hezbollah's head of operations.
February 1992. Hezbollah Secretary General Abbas Massawi is killed by the IDF. Muniyah begins organizing underground terror cells across the world. March 1992. 29 people killed in a bombing in the Israeli embassy in Argentina. July 1994. 85 people killed in a suicide bombing in the Buenos Aires Community Center. October of 2000, kidnapping 3 IDF soldiers in northern Israel and of Israeli businessman Elchanan Tenenbaum. October 2001, the FBI lists Muniyah on its wanted list, putting a $5 million price on his head. March 2002, 6 people killed in an infiltration of Hezbollah militants into kibbutz Metzuvah in Israel. July 2006, kidnapping of 2 Israeli soldiers, Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser, on the Israeli border with Lebanon. February 12, 2008. Muniyah assassinated in a car bomb in Kfar Susa neighborhood of Damascus.
The world is a better place without this man in it, and he was one of the most dangerous terrorists ever on earth. These are only a few of the Western eulogies Muniyah received. From the other side, mourners said the resistance has lost one of its pillars. Even today, 6 years later, Hezbollah periodically announces its plans to avenge the death of their great leader by retaliating against Israel. One thing is certain: if Muniyah was still alive, the world would look different today.
Joining me now from our studio in Paris is Roger Oak, a man who had an unusually close and harrowing encounter with Imad Muniyah himself. In the 1980s, Oak was a correspondent in Beirut, deep in the Lebanese civil war. His career took an extreme turn when, at the age of 31, he was taken hostage there in 1987. Well, he and another French captive returned to Paris in November of that year, greeted by their families and Prime Minister Jacques Chirac after some 11 months in captivity. Well, thank you for joining us on the program here tonight. I understand that you met Imad Muniyah in 1985 as a journalist. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, I met twice Imad Muniyah in '85 because when he tried to make the hijack of the plane it was in April '85. It was for Alia plane in Beirut, and after that in May for the TWA also in Beirut. I met twice Imad Mounier. Why? Because I was on the tarmac of the airport of Beirut, and I was the only journalist to succeed and to meet Imad Mounier twice. At that time, I didn't know it was Imad Mounier. I knew it was a kind of chief of the hijackers, but I didn't know it was Imad Mounier. But after that, let's say after June '85, I understood that guy, this man, was the chief of the hijackers of Amal and Hezbollah in the same time, and we understood that Imad Mounier was the chief to kidnap the people in Beirut, but not only in Beirut. It was also the car bomb in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, in Syria, and I understood after '85 and before I was kidnapped myself in '87. I hope that I discover at this time that Imad Mounier was the real chief of the.
Well, you were a defense journalist there at the time.
Terrorist in Beirut.
You were a defense journalist there, working in Beirut, and you were in touch with various intelligence services. As far as we know, did you ever have any contact with the Israeli Mossad?
Yes, of course. I was all the time with good relations with the Mossad, with the Secret Service in Israel, like in Beirut, and before 2002. Before the assassination, the murder of Imad Mounier in Syria, the Israeli Secret Service in Tel Aviv met me maybe twice, and they told me that they wanted to find the new phone number of Imad Mounier. So I decided to find the new phone number of Imad Mounier in Damas. I asked to some Lebanese friend to find the new phone number of Imad Mounier, and I can tell you that we found the new phone number of Imad Mounier in Damas, and that's why I know today. I can tell you today. Today, it's Israeli Secret Service who decide to kill and to make an assassination on Imad Mounier in Damas.
You feel sure that Israel was behind the assassination of Mounier?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that Israeli Mossad was behind the assassination, the murder of the Imad Mounier, and I'm very happy of that.
How did you feel when you first heard about the fact that he'd been assassinated?
I was very happy that Imad Mounier could be killed by Israeli Mossad, because Imad Mounier was the chief of the terrorists for maybe 20 years. And I'm very happy that the Mossad, that the Israeli Secret Service decide to kill Imad Mounier in Damascus, and I am sure that Israeli Secret Service, the Mossad, succeeded. It was a success to kill Imad Mounier in Damascus in Syria.
Well, Mr. Oak, you claim to have met the missing Israeli navigator Ron Arad. What can you tell us about him and that meeting?
you know, Ron Arad, between 86 and 87, 89, we have some very good contact with the American Secret Service, with the French Secret Service, and with the American Secret Service, to try to release, to get the revelation of Ron Arad. And the first step for the French Secret Service, for the American service, the first step was to release Ron Arad, and after that to release the American hostages and the British hostages, and almost succeed to do that. But you know, during almost 2 years, Ron Arad was kidnapped in the Iranian embassy in Beirut for almost 2 years, and we tried to release Ron Arad, but after 2 years, the Tidar was tried to. They were trying to make it to send him to in Iran. So after 2 years in Beirut, the terrorists decide to send Ron Arad in Tehran, in Iran. So we never had very good news or very new news about Ron Arad. But it's true that during 2 years we tried to get the release of Ron Arad, but we didn't succeed.
Well, thank you very much, Roger.
Very sad.
Thank you very much for joining us here from Paris. Well, moving on now, the head of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, was heckled during a speech today at the Israeli Parliament. Well, in response to his comments on the Palestinians, members of the Israeli right walked out in protest. Well, here's I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev on the latest diplomatic debacle.
It started out with good intentions. European Parliament President Martin Schulz, visiting Israel, was trying to ease recent tensions between Jerusalem and Brussels amid recurring reports of a European trend of boycotting Israeli settlement goods. The boycott threat is the latest hot topic in Jerusalem and was high on the agenda on Schulz's 4-day visit to the region. But Schulz's schmoozing didn't go so well, at least not in the Israeli parliament. Speaking in his mother tongue, German, he gave a generally pro-Israel speech, praising Israel's ability to rise from the ashes of the Holocaust. But when he addressed the peace process and dared to criticize the Gaza blockade, Palestinian freedom of movement and access to water, he created a storm of protest from the Israeli right.
A Palestinian teenager asked me why an Israeli can use 70 cubic liters of water and a Palestinian just 17.
Right-wing MKs, led by the Jewish Home Party, walked out in the middle of Schulz's speech, blaming the European guest for lying about the Palestinian situation. Bennett later called on Schulz to apologize and emphasized that he was standing up for Israel's national honor.
He speak from the Israeli parliament and say that Israel is make a blockade in the Gaza and stop the food and basic things to citizens in Gaza. It's a lie.
Later on, the Israeli Prime Minister too weighed in on the debate, stating that the European speaker presented false figures. After the heated debate in the Knesset, Schulz received a more diplomatic welcoming at the president's residence, where he was praised for his support of Israel rather than reprimanded.
We also appreciate the ongoing interest the European Union is taking in the peace process, which right now reached a crucial point.
Paris tried to erase the Knesset debacle, and Schulz did his best to smile it away. But his visit will now be remembered for this spat. The already strained Israel-EU relations probably could have done without it.
Well, after much talk of reconciliation between Ankara and Jerusalem, Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan demanded a written Israeli promise to lift its blockade of Gaza as a condition for signing a reconciliation agreement. Well, Israel has responded, saying the blockade will not be lifted. Well, joining me now on set is Professor Dror Zevi from Ben-Gurion University. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Good evening.
So I have to ask you, it seems that Erdogan is not so interested in actual reconciliation with Israel. But with so much instability in the region, why not? Why is he still forcing this issue?
Well, Erdogan is now fighting for his life. This is what's happening inside Turkey. There are huge corruption charges against him, and he's trying every trick in the book to stay out of the courts and actually go on running the country. His own constituency, the people who support him most, don't really like Israel very much. They don't think that it's a good idea for Turkey to be friends with Israel. So I think that Erdogan at this point thinks that this is not a good idea to have good relations. And I think there was some kind of a discrepancy between the Foreign Office in Turkey.
He disagreed with his foreign minister recently.
Well,
here.
Apparently the foreign ministry tried to improve the relations, perhaps because there are such an array of bad relationships with Turkey, with Egypt, Syria, and other countries. So they tried to improve relations with Israel, but it didn't really chime with what Prime Minister Erdogan wanted. So I think he went against his foreign minister in this case.
If you're Israel in this situation here, why respond at all to this latest punch by Erdogan?
Well, I think if the Israeli diplomats or politicians understood what's going on in Turkey, they wouldn't be so keen on improving relations right now. This is not a good time to do that. Turkey is not in a situation where it can improve relations with Israel. It's tied up in its own problems. The country is going to a very long debate, struggle between the parties, between the politicians. So I don't think it's a good time for Israel to do this. It should have done it perhaps 2 years ago when the time was right, but this is not a good time.
So you're saying even in the face of this mass unrest on their border with Syria, you'd think there'd be more shared interest between Israel and Turkey to reestablish relations, to reestablish some semblance of stability in the region. Do the domestic issues in Turkey trump that? They're more important on Erdogan's
Apparently they
agenda?
do. Apparently there are huge issues on the table. Syria is a huge issue. Iran is a very big issue. The gas problems and the oil problems of Israel, Cyprus, and Turkey are immense. There is so much to be gained from cooperation between Turkey and Israel. And yet, as you can see, this all takes the backseat to the main struggle inside Turkey right now.
With the elections coming up within Turkey.
The local elections are coming up. And even more than that, it seems like the government is going to be, as I said, fighting for its life, or maybe even toppled in the next few months. So we don't know.
Internal scandals or just political infighting? What's most likely to topple?
Well, the internal scandals are what tripled it, what started it all. But I think now it's all about struggles within the ruling party. Erdogan has managed to subdue the army, the judicial system, the media. They're all subservient to his will right now, and there's very little that goes on publicly in the press in Turkey. But there is a struggle within the ruling party, the AKP. And some say that the president, Gül, is the likely one to replace Erdogan if this is...
Well, thank you very much for joining us here and for your insight, Professor Drozevi.
You're welcome.
Well, now Egypt's military chief al-Sisi is in Moscow in a rare visit to the Russian capital by the Arab nation's top commander. Well, it's the first official visit since the popular coup that toppled the country's Islamist president last summer. Russia's trying to expand its influence in Egypt as they're a key U.S. ally in the Middle East since the 1970s and recently initiated an arms deal with the country. Al-Sisi is widely expected to announce he will run for president in the upcoming election set for late April. And coming up on this evening edition, a very rare high-level meeting between Korean officials. And decades after World War II's end, the women of the Philippines take to the streets and demand compensation from Japan. We'll be back after this 2-minute break. to the evening edition here on I-24 News. Now, on their humanitarian mission, UN officials evacuated additional people today from homes in Syria while continuing to deliver aid to those who remain. Meanwhile, Syria's opposition came out with a proposal that calls for the creation of a transitional governing body to oversee a ceasefire to end the 3-year civil war. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblazé reports.
Peace talks over Syria's fate may be on a path to nowhere. But for some residents of homes, a modicum of relief has arrived. They have at last been evacuated from their besieged city, where conditions are dire.
Nobody's able to actually feed themselves, feed their children, feed their families with anything but weeds, the grass that they can pick on the side of the curb. They are barely and have been barely existing.
The rescue is a modest achievement for a deadlocked international community, which brokered a 12-hour ceasefire to allow for the evacuation.
Homs can be called a success. That has been 6 months in the making, 6 long months to get a couple of hundred people, no, a little bit more than that, about 800 people out, and a little bit of food in.
Specifically, 1 month's worth of food and medicine for a mere 1,500 people. On Tuesday night, U.S. President Barack Obama pledged to do more.
We're working with our Security Council partners to call for an end to indiscriminate attacks on civilians and to ensure humanitarian aid workers have unimpeded access to Syrians in need.
Obama called on Russia to hold the Syrian government accountable for the well-being of its citizens. But Moscow itself is acting as an impediment. Russia sees the UN draft resolution on aid access in Syria as a ploy, a means of creating grounds for military intervention. Everyone is seemingly divided. The Syrian regime and its opponents over the future of President Bashar Assad. The West and East over everything else. In the interim, the carnage continues.
It's terrible, and when you consider the humanitarian disaster, in addition to the 2.5 million refugees, the 6.5 million or 7 million that are internally displaced, the 134,000 plus people that have been killed, it is an apocalyptic disaster.
To that, what more can possibly be added?
Now, winds over 100 miles per hour and massive flooding are just part of the extreme weather battering the British coastline this week. Well, now authorities have issued what's called a red warning for people in 16 different flood zones to be evacuated. Meanwhile, the intense winds have caused widespread structural damage and left thousands without power. And joining me now is I-24 News London correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti. Hi, thanks for joining us here.
Hi.
So tell us, what's the latest on this storm front?
Well, the Met Office, which is the United Kingdom's National Weather Service, has issued a red alert warning for 100-mile-per-hour winds in western parts of Wales, spreading to the northwest of England. And that's a very rare weather event in the UK. With more than a month's worth of rain expected in the next few days alone, they've said it's the worst flooding along the Thames for 60 years. And Met Office advice in some areas is to avoid all non-essential journeys as there's a risk to life. Speeds of 99 miles per hour, wind speeds, have been measured off the coast of Ireland and 76 miles per hour off the Isles of Scilly. So things are really quite extreme in many parts of the UK at the moment.
Well, this is definitely unusual weather for people up there. How are people specifically in the areas that are most affected, how are they responding to this?
Prime Minister David Cameron has promised whatever it takes to help in the recovery effort, saying that money is no object. So people are putting on a brave face, waiting for troops and waiting for sandbags to help them. Some are complaining that it's not happening quickly enough. Some are being evacuated effectively. So far, people seem to be coping relatively well, and there's a sort of Dunkirk spirit, as is common for Brits. But it's horrific for people who are caught in these floods, who are seeing water entering their homes, seeing the streets they live in knee-high in water, if not higher. And in parts of North Wales, there are such high winds blowing at the moment that people are having to leave their homes.
Well, it's been an especially tough winter up there. How long is this all supposed to last?
There's no sign of the rain and extreme weather stopping. In fact, with these high winds and this 1 month worth of rain expected to fall in the next 2 or 3 days, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. And Prime Minister David Cameron said that if the rain stopped right now, the water levels would not return to normal until May. So it looks like we're in for the long haul here with this extreme weather.
Well, thank you for the update, and stay dry up there. Jonathan Sashadoti in London.
Thank you.
Well, top officials from North and South Korea held a rare meeting today in a border city. One of the major issues on the agenda, planned family reunions for dozens of war veterans who've been separated for over 60 years. Well, here's more from I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira.
Enemies, a love story. This title might define the complicated relationship between North and South Korea. Today, the two countries are holding a highly unusual meeting between top officials from both nations. The main issue on the table, the reunion of families divided by the Korean War.
This is an opportunity to open a new era of the Korean Peninsula.
Negotiations around this delicate subject took place recently without results, mainly due to the ongoing tensions surrounding mutual accusations of military actions. Earlier this week, North Korean officials warned South Korea on holding its annual joint military exercise with the US, set to start later this month. The South Korea Unification Ministry spokesman tried to calm the situation last week, but also accused North Korea for holding preparation for another long-distance missile test.
It is an annual and defensive exercise which is not related to the family reunion, so our government thinks that the family reunion should go ahead as previously agreed and planned with the North.
Nevertheless, both sides gathered today to solve one of the most crucial issues of contention between the two nations for years. 61 years after the Korean War cemented the division between them, dozens of war veterans and their families are still waiting to be reunited. Perhaps the results of these talks could begin the break of the physical and mental borders firmly ingrained in the Korean Peninsula.
Well, now, the subject of war crimes committed during World War II has been the source of ongoing tension between Japan and its regional neighbors. One of the most controversial surrounds the quote-unquote comfort women, or young girls who were forced into Japanese military brothels during the war. Well, I-24 News reporter Ronnie Ben-Bassat has the story from the Philippines.
It's been almost 69 years since Japan's surrender day, the move that finally ended World War II in the Pacific. But for these women, the fight continues to this day. In front of the Japanese embassy in Manila, 8 surviving former comfort women who were forced into prostitution by the Japanese army asked for the silence to be broken.
We have the right to demand justice from the Japanese government. We did not invite them in the Philippines. We have fallen victim to the Japanese soldiers, Japanese government.
A euphemism for sex slave, the term comfort woman refers to some 200,000 women who were abused in military brothels in territories occupied by Japan at the time. They were often as young as 11 or 12 years old. Over the past years, the matter has surfaced as a point of contention between Japan and its neighbors over the subject of compensation and historical inclusion of the women in Japan's account of World War II.
I hope they respond to the case we've put against them, because in World War II we were abused by Japanese soldiers. So here we are, we've been fighting for this for a long time. We've been calling for justice for a long time, but the Japanese government is playing deaf and not heeding us.
While China, South Korea, and the Philippines often reopen the subject in demonstrations and diplomatic channels, the Japanese government has routinely refused to be drawn into the issue. But the remaining comfort women will not give up, and furthermore, refuse to forget. And although decades have gone by, they still believe it is never too late for an apology.
Moving on now, Toyota issued a recall of all 1.9 million third-generation Prius cars that have been sold worldwide due to a programming glitch in their hybrid system. Well, in limited cases, the system could shut down and cause the vehicle to stop, possibly while moving. Well, about half of the recalls are in Japan and over 700,000 in North America. Well, it's the third recall for the 5-year-old Prius, as automakers in general are increasingly proactive with safety concerns. Now, Wall Street continued to rise for a fourth straight session on Tuesday as Congress agreed to advance legislation extending U.S. borrowing authority, while the Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted to increase the U.S. debt ceiling without conditions. Well, the Senate is expected to pass the bill later this week and avoid further standoffs that have drained economic confidence. We're now joined in the studio by economy correspondent Daniel Roth. Good to have you in here again, Daniel.
How's it going?
Great. So, this latest debt issue in Washington, it seems to have passed relatively smoothly compared to what we've seen in the past here. What exactly happened this week?
So, a few months ago, you may remember that the government shut down. America was shut down. Not exactly, but something like that.
Amid much drama as well, yes.
Yeah, so this was no drama. There was nothing involved. 28 Republicans voted along with almost all of the Democrats. They pushed it through, no strings attached. It's going to be another year and a bit before they have to deal with this again. What happened is that the shutdown dragged the GOP, the Republicans, through the mud. Their good name was dragged through the mud, and people started to see
they were seen as being difficult in that process.
Yeah, they were the bad guys.
Right.
They were the bad guys, and everyone knew it, and they knew it, and so they lost. They really lost that battle, and they couldn't come at this one in the same way. And part of what happened, aside from that, was that because they had to drop the issue of the debt limit, the debt ceiling, they also didn't rally around another issue. So they didn't have any sort of rallying cry to draw people into their corner, and this is the result.
So would you argue that President Obama did something right this time in contrast to the crisis in October? Did he manage this better?
I think the truth is that the GOP just did it wrong. And, it's not that this is the end of the story. The LA Times actually put it quite well that this is just a way to make sure that the U.S. doesn't really embarrass itself anymore economically. What will happen is this argument will continue in Congress for the foreseeable future, but at least it won't be quite as embarrassing.
Speaking of the ongoing debate argument here, what is the end game? I mean, where's it all heading?
Look, it's a great question. Will somehow the entire global economic system change? Maybe. If it changes, then this whole debt ceiling thing, we could see an end to that. The truth is, though, the global economy relies on these kinds of relationships.
This has been the stability of the U.S. system, in other words, is crucial to the stability of largely the world economy.
Yeah, I mean, currency-wise and confidence-wise, everyone looks to America all the time. They're really the economic big brother.
If they drop the bipartisan arguments here and issues, I recall healthcare was also on the agenda before in October. This was an attack on the Obama administration in a way, as we saw in October. It just didn't happen this time.
Yeah, no. So part of losing that October battle meant that they didn't get into any of those other issues, and they didn't have any sort of linchpin issue that they could all wrap around and rally around, and it just left them all in the dust, with 28 of them voting with the Democrats. And some of them, by the way, are going to be in big trouble with the Tea Party. Already are some Tea Party favorites who voted that way.
For not taking a harder stance there on the issue. Well, thank you again, Daniel Roth, for being here. Well, now, 50 years after the Beatles invaded the U.S., they're back on the same American stage, or at least their impersonators are, and they're performing the same classic songs that became the soundtrack of so many lives since. Live 24 News culture correspondent Jaffa Port looks back at the Beatlemania that changed the world.
If you happened to be in Washington, D.C. yesterday, you could have witnessed history repeating itself.
I said these words to my girl.
The Fab Four stormed the Coliseum just like 50 years back when, 2 days after their historic U.S. television debut, they took a train through a snowstorm from New York to Washington for their first concert in North America.
I was here for the first concert. I was here. The stage was a boxing ring in the middle of the arena, and I was in the 5th row.
This February 11th, also a Tuesday, it was instead a tribute concert by the Beatlemania Now band, who went through the original 12-song set list with the same clothes and haircuts and at the exact spot of an unheated ice and boxing arena where the original Beatles performed.
My dad was the manager of the arena, and I was a huge Beatlemaniac, and I was so excited that they were coming to the arena, and my dad...
The 1964 concert was the event of a lifetime for the 8,000 fans and the intensely excited audience. And although the modern replica attracted a lesser 3,000 people back to the historic site, any kind of reproduction could never live up to what happened there 50 years ago.
It was, I think, 12 weeks or just a few months after the assassination of Kennedy. So there was a real need for something like the Beatles to come and bring a little life back to America at the time.
Despite Capitol Records' doubt that the music of the Four Wonders from Liverpool would suit American tastes, the Beatles performed a second concert in New York's Carnegie Hall the following day, February 12th, and brought back the British invasion to the US once again that year in August. The rest, as we know, is history.
Well, now, for the most of us, weddings are a private affair between friends and family. But not in this case. Thousands of Unification Church members were married in a mass wedding in South Korea. Only the second such event since the death of their Messiah, as they call him, and controversial church founder Sun Myung-moon. Well, some 2,500 identically dressed couples, many of mixed nationality, who had just met days before, took part in the ceremony at the church's global headquarters east of the capital, Seoul. Well, congratulations to all of them. Now, still ahead on this I-24 News Evening Edition. The daily debate, terrorism and targeted assassination. After the killing of its commander, how did Hezbollah adapt and what are its military capabilities today? And on One, behind the scenes of Israel's special operations. We'll be right back after the short break with the Daily Debate.